Sure. Right. All right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya wa mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi min tabauhum bi ihsanin ila yawm wa ba'd. So your brother, Saeed Purcell, Abu Suhaila, Saeed al-Amriki, as the Imams like to still joke with me about from years back. So we're here today, and for the next 8 weeks or more, depending on vacations, etc., inshallah, to talk about the foundations of a healthy marriage. Now, since for most of you, I'm new to you, obviously, Abu Sumayya and myself know each other for many years. A brief introduction to myself. None of this is on the slide. A brief introduction so that you understand where I'm coming from, what my background is when we're discussing this topic, and to set proper expectations. So I'm a convert like many of you, if not all of you. I'm into my 33rd year as a Muslim. So over 50% of my life has been in Islam, alhamdulillah. So as much my identity as anything else ever was. I had the good fortune, as Abu Sumayya alluded to have the opportunity to study at a formal level, getting 2 degrees in Islamic studies, pursuing graduate level studies, did not finish that. Many other studies, ijazat, certifications, traditional certifications, and numerous texts. Inshallah, there will be an opportunity coming up in the near future that Abu Sumayya and I are working on for an ijaza in a particular traditional text for some of our trainers, I guess is the idea, etc. So some education besides my secular education in computers and electronics and audio engineering, etc. So married, 3 kids of my own, many stepchildren. We won't get into numbers because the numbers would scare you. And just to set proper expectations because of the topic that we're talking about. So I am married now. My current wife and I, we've been together for over 8 years now. Alhamdulillah, we're in our 9th year of marriage and we're going extremely strong, which I am very extremely grateful for. And part of the reason I want to make sure that I say these things up front is to set proper expectations. So we're going to be talking about the foundations of a healthy marriage from a number of different aspects. Obviously, in this setting, we're going to be talking about it with an Islamic lens as part of the paradigm that we're using, part of the filter that we're seeing things through. We'll also be discussing it from for lack of a better way of saying this, a traditional, not so much secular, but a traditional counseling therapeutic lens in terms of couples therapy and things of that nature. So I mentioned the Islamic studies degrees. I also have done some studies. I hesitate to use the word advanced studies in couples therapy and Islamic psychology and things like that, etc. So just so that we're clear, I am not, I repeat, not a counselor or a therapist, but I offer Naseehah. I offer advice for couples and for individuals and even institutions in regards to a number of different matters, one of them being couples relationships. So that's where this is coming from. I do have trainings on the slide. You can see up in the one corner, might be a little hard to read, but Gottman, the Gottman Institute, one of the organizations I trained with in terms of couples therapy. I am not certified through Gottman, but I have trained in that method, so I understand their method at some level beyond the publicly available books, etc. So that, most importantly, and this is the thing I want to set out there so that we have clear expectations, it's from practical experience. We're going to be talking about this. And a lot of that won't be in the slide. That'll be something that you hear from me directly. So alhamdulillah, I'm married, and I've been married now for the last 9 years, almost 9 years. I have 3 kids. All 3 of those children are from previous marriages, plural. Each child is from a different marriage. So I've been married to a total of 5 different women over the course of my life, once before Islam and 4 times after Islam. And so married and divorced, obviously, from those previous marriages. And so I've seen some success and definitely some failure. So I know what it looks like on the other side as well. And so, for lack of a better way of saying this, I have practical experience in seeing things work and seeing things not work. And I'm under no illusions about that. And we actually go into the statistics about our marriages in the Muslim community. But suffice it to say that the divorce numbers in the Muslim community are fast approaching those of the larger community, and that is something that's often unspoken. So I just wanted to set that out there, set proper expectations. Any other things that come up, questions, etc., we will deal with that. As I mentioned before we get started, just some brief housekeeping. I want to see if it's there. Hang on one sec. Okay, it doesn't look like that. We are recording now, Samaya?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. Yes.
All right, good. All right, just want to make sure about that. So we don't have the Q&A feature, so if you have questions, just for the sake of clarity, etc., if you can jot those down either in the chat or to yourself, and then we will leave time towards the end, ideally 15 minutes or more for questions. As I had said in the chat today, we may run a little long since this is the first session, but we'll try and keep it as tight as possible, inshallah. So going with that, did we lose the slide? Looks like we might have lost the slide. Am I right?
No, we're still seeing it. We can still see it, Sheikh.
Okay, that just must be on my end. All right, no problem. Let me get back. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, introductory slide. This is just to introduce the topic of our presentation, which is building a strong marriage in Islam. And this first session, we're going to be talking about the first of a number of different principles. And let me try, and I'll share that later. I won't try and do that now, so we don't take so. I mentioned the Gottman Method before. The Gottman Method Couples Method, just in very brief, for those who aren't familiar with it already, the Gottman Method is a research-based couples therapy method that was developed over the course of decades of actual research with couples, where they were interviewing, profiling in very great degree. I mean, they're measuring breathing rate, heart rate, etc. They're observing them overnight and things like that. It's so very in-depth research focused. Just different than most previous counseling and therapy, because that was just somebody's best guess or a theory that they had that either worked or didn't work. It was thousands of couples over decades that they observed, not just once, but repeatedly over years, to see how they progressed. And the way they marketed their final method that they developed was that they could predict with 96% accuracy if a couple would stay married or get divorced. So that was the level at which they had gotten to the certainty in their model in terms of being able to determine who is a relationship master and who's a relationship disaster, they like to refer to it as. So the Gottman Method has something they call the relationship house. And there are 7 levels and 2 walls to this house. It's a metaphor, and I'll share the design later for that, so that you can see better what I'm talking about. I don't actually have it on these slides today. Second here. I need to put my computer on Do Not Disturb. I just realized. All right. So this is the first level, the ground level, if you will, of the relationship house, which is the love maps. And so we're going to be talking about love maps in tonight's session. So love maps approach focuses on deepening the connection and understanding between the spouses through knowledge, communication, and applying Islamic principles. And this is my adaptation of that. And I'll go into some details about that as well. So we'll be beginning by providing an overview of the key elements of the love maps approach, and then how it can help strengthen marriages in general. Right. So this is our agenda. We'll try to keep to it as best that we can. It outlines the key topics we're going to cover in the presentation on strengthening the marriage through love maps. First things off, we'll discuss what love maps are and why they're important for a healthy marriage. Next, we will explore how love maps align with Islamic principles of marriage. And then we will cover communication techniques for building effective dialogue with your spouse. Finally, this is one of my favorite parts of this presentation, we'll look at practical activities. These are things you can take home and do with your relationship immediately or very, very soon thereafter, practical activities and habits to strengthen the connection in your marriage. Okay, so love maps are the foundation for truly knowing your spouse's inner world, their worries, stresses, joys, pleasures, hopes, and dreams, which are very important values, beliefs, and even daily experiences. This knowledge must be continuously updated as people grow and change throughout life. Knowing your spouse's inner world in this way is crucial for building a strong and lasting relationship. So, one of the analogies they use when they're talking about this within the Gottman Method training is, like, for instance, talking about premarital questionnaire. Some of you are familiar with these, etc. And I'll share one, an updated one that I've started using recently for couples that are interested in getting married. And it's important to have those conversations prior to marriage, if at all possible, whenever possible, getting to know one another and really getting a feeling for what is important, what isn't important, etc. And just as a side point on that, when you're looking at marriage, not married yet, but you're looking at getting married to someone, even before you start the process of discussing the possibility of marriage with someone, you want to personally be clear on your must-haves and your hard stops. So it requires you to do some work on yourself first and foremost. You have to figure out what's important to you, what you have to have, what things must be there in a relationship for it to be meaningful and significant to you enough that you can make it last and you can make it work and make sacrifices. Sacrifices will be necessary. Also, the things that you actively cannot stand cannot be there, where will be a hard stop. You are going to start looking for the door immediately if these things pop up in your relationship. You need to know these things about yourself long before you start talking to somebody. The minute you start talking to somebody, emotions get involved, and then the brain starts to kind of lose its control. So you want to try and get clear on that stuff right up front. Now, as I say that, I want to make this clear. You want to get clear on those must-haves and hard stops, but you also need to understand that those things can change. They can change over time. They can change even in the course of getting to know a particular person. But it's important that you have that examination of yourself beforehand so that you have some clarity and that you aren't as easily pulled and pushed and pulled by the forces of a budding relationship as you start that whole process of such getting to know it. But now this idea of those conversations had before getting married, as important as those are, that shouldn't be the only time it ever happens. That's where this point about the knowledge, these love maps should be continuously updated. The analogy they use, a little outdated now, but back when TomTom was the go-to for maps, map system in your car, you'd have to wait for the satellite to download the latest map in order to make sure you didn't get lost while you drove. Similarly, with a love map with our spouses, it's not a one and done thing. It's not when you meet them, you ask them these important questions, you get your answers, you build your love map of your spouse, and you're good to go for the rest of the marriage. That can change. That will change, as a matter of fact. And so it's important to always have ongoing conversation and keep checking in with one another about how things are going, et cetera, so that you can stay current and you can stay responsive to where your spouse is at. Things may be happening in their day, in their week, or whatever, that make some of these answers different in that moment, or maybe you can permanently from that point onward. It's important to know those things. And this is the way you get to know that inner world of your spouse. So, and I want to put this out there. It's, it's not just the women, but the women tend to expect this more than the men, but the men do it sometimes too. Um, Having these love maps of our spouses is important, is very, very crucial. We should not mistake love maps for being an excuse to expect our spouse to be able to, quote unquote, read our mind. That's unfair. No matter how well we know one another, we can't expect the other person to know our minds, to know our hearts. It's important for us to speak for ourselves, to manifest those things that are important to us. Yes, they may have a good enough sense of us that they can pick up on certain cues and make educated guesses, but you can't expect them to know, truly know states of your hearts or the things that are truly bothering you if you don't speak them. That way you remove all doubt and you avoid some arguments in the process. Please, love maps are important, but you don't want to use them as an excuse to expect your spouse to know your unspoken truths. You want to speak those truths whenever necessary so that there's not any of that ambiguity. That being said, before I move on to the next slide real quickly, um, this is kind of beyond even love maps and the whole thing, just within the whole landscape of relationships. One of the things that was found throughout the course of their decades of research and the thousands of couples they talked to, there's one indicator of success in a relationship. The thing that seemed to be the strongest indicator of success in a relationship was the underlying friendship. Now, I know some of you immediately, as you hear that, might be saying, "Yeah, but wait, we don't date, we don't, do these things, etc. How are we supposed to build that friendship, etc." That isn't necessarily a problem. Um, some couples historically, there wasn't that sort of dating, etc. You had, courtship, you had chaperones. This is not a unique concept. I mean, Islam and Muslims didn't invent these concepts. These are concepts that existed throughout the history of mankind. It's only within the last 150 years that those things have changed. So, not having the opportunity to live together, we want to get into the statistics that show living together actually increases the likelihood of divorce, not diminishes the likelihood of divorce. So, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But there are ways to build that friendship. I mean, there are, there is. We don't want to call it dating necessarily. There is a way for couples to get to know one another within the confines of Islam, in the confines of the Sharia. That isn't something that's completely anathema. It's not something that's completely impossible. There are approaches and ways to do that. That as goes into the whole process of marriage. We won't spend too much energy on the fit of marriage. If you haven't already covered that, that's maybe another thing that we can think about doing. But this is going to be focused more on um, couple specific stuff about living together in a marriage, building a strong marriage, etc. The fit of that, the marital relationship, that's something that kind of requires its own separate to be under, etc. So this is important. But that underlying friendship is key because the friendship is the thing that allows you to weather the storms as they come up. Now, real quickly, as I move on to the next slide, I just want to end or add this one last point, which is that in addition to that underlying friendship, the thing you always want to be mindful of, etc., is the following as well, which is that besides the friendship that should be there to help weather the storms of life in general, you also want to bear in mind, and there's some athars from the Salaf, some narrations from the Salaf that talk about this, and I'm going to paraphrase it for the sake of time and brevity. Essentially, that when you are looking to marry your daughter, make sure to marry her to a muttaqi, someone who has taqwa, because the one who has taqwa will treat her good. If she's righteous, if she's obedient, and if she becomes disobedient and becomes unrighteous, he won't harm her, won't be oppressive to her. So you want someone with that religious spiritual quality in order to have the best interests of your daughter at heart. And we know, unfortunately, many times in our communities nowadays, the thing that's looked at, although there's a lot of lip service given to looking for the religious person, the reality is that they're looking for the one that has the biggest bank account, the nicest car, the nicest house, he's the most handsome, she's the most beautiful, yada, 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 all of that stuff, which isn't the most important thing in the world. It's valuable. It's not to be diminished. It is still something that someone is going to look at. But the thing that guarantees the best success is a person that has that taqwa. And taqwa, we have to remember, even the Prophet ﷺ, when he was talking about taqwa as a quality and something to look for in an individual, this goes back to the hadith about the four qualities and looking for the one that has deen. Look for the one that you may be successful or may cover your hands. Look for the one with deen. Is that deen isn't necessarily something you can look at them and be like, oh, mashallah, look at his beard, mashallah, look at her khimar, look at her niqab, etc. This isn't deen necessarily. The hypocrites, the munafiqeen, in the time of the Prophet, they dressed like him. They wore beards. They had turbans. They were in thobes. They were in jilbabs, etc. They were in all of these things. They spoke Arabic. So how is that your yardstick? Not an accurate yardstick. A hypocrite, even a disbeliever, can put on the appearances of Muslim, to put on the appearances of religion, if this is the only way you judge religion. Religion is a quality that is more difficult to judge. And when you look at taqwa as a defining attribute that you're looking for, remember the Prophet's statements when he was talking about this term. He said, "Taqwa hahuna." Taqwa is here, and it's in the heart. So when I look at you, when you look at someone, you can't tell just by seeing them their level of taqwa. They can't tell your level of taqwa just by seeing you. That's why, and this is kind of a tangent here, when Omar was approached someone to ask them about a man that, in regards to marriage to one of the Sahabiyat, and he told him, he said, he's a good person. How do you know this? And he told him, he said, well, I see him in the masjid. He says, no, 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 no. You have to see him. You have to do business with him. You have to travel with him. You have to live next to him, etc. This thing only is not enough. He shows up at the masjid, mashallah, that's great, but that doesn't tell the whole story. People can be very different in business, where they can seem, mashallah, wonderful in the masjid. They may be in thobes and beards and turbans in the masjid, but then they get to the office and they're unrecognizable. So we have to be mindful of this thing, is that, being taqwa is something that is not something that's easily perceived. And it does take time. It does take time. And so for converts in particular, that can be a challenge for us because we don't have families that we know growing up, that people that are Muslim all our lives that we get to see grow up and see how they carry themselves. And so we don't have that. So we have a big challenge in that regard. So that's something very nice. Getting back to the point at hand, the slide that we have in front of us. So marriage in Islam is described as a garment relationship, close, intimate, and protective bond between spouses. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Hunna libasun lakum wa antum libasun lakum. This is Surah Al-Baqarah, Ayah 187, that they are clothing for you and you are a clothing for them, meaning a source of tranquility and rest, a source of protection. And part of the description, they allude to it in what we said earlier, is that the clothing is very close to you. It's close to your skin. It's close to your body. It's one of the closest things to you. So not only that is it close to you, but it also provides you protection from heat, from being exposed, from things like that, etc. The relationship between spouses should be just like that. There should be that closeness. There should be that aspect of protection, etc. And so the Quran is using this metaphor of garments to illustrate how the spouses should shield, comfort, and conform to one another. Should fit like a glove, and they're meant to provide each other with protection from harm and temptation. Important to understand is that relationship, yeah, that, lack of a better way of saying it, that intimate relationship, that sexual relationship that is part of marriage, that is a desired and important part of marriage because this is the way we protect each other from temptation. Men and women. I know oftentimes we think of men as the ones that are subject to temptation, but women can be tempted as well. Women can do feel desires as well. And so it's important that both parties are protected from these things. And that's what the marital bond is for. And so that should be there, just as garments protect the body as well. And there should be a deep and intimate knowledge between spouses where they conform to each other's needs like a well-fitted garment. So you should know one another and you should be able to adapt. You should be able to, you shouldn't have to take it to a tailor. You should be able to adapt and adjust according to the changes. This goes back to that idea of the love maps needing to be updated from time to time as times go on. So marriage should create a sense of tranquility and emotional sanctuary for both partners. Both partners key there. Not the man has an advantage over the woman, etc. Nothing like that. So developing these love maps, this deep understanding of each other is a key to fulfilling this divine vision of the marital relationship. So the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was renowned for his deep understanding and alert attentiveness to his wives. He could discern even Aisha's radiallahu anha emotions and feelings through even the subtlest of cues and expressions. There's a great narration you find in Sahih al-Bukhari where the Prophet is speaking to Aisha radiallahu anha, and he says, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I know when you are pleased with me and when you are angry with me. So she's pleasantly surprised by the statement. So she asks him, how do you know this? So he replied to her that when she's pleased with him, he would say, "No, by the Lord of Muhammad." Whenever she was angry with him, she would say, "No, by the Lord of Abraham." So when she heard that, she smiled because he realized he really had been paying attention. But she said, "Wallahi, O Messenger of Allah, that is true, but I only leave your name." And even though she's angry, he doesn't let it take her out of bounds. She does change her if you speak, but she only leaves his name. So in spite of the emotion, she doesn't allow that to take her too far. That alludes to something from the Prophet. So I'm alluding to this idea of emotion. Emotions sometimes are made to seem like they're anathema, like they're alien to a righteous Muslim. They're not supposed to be emotional creatures. They're not supposed to feel things. They're not supposed to, feel sadness, feel joy, feel any of these things. That is not real. That is not accurate. That is not fair, even. Emotions are a part of the human condition. Emotions are something that, in and of themselves, are not good or bad. What we do with the emotions we feel. So, this is an example here where Aisha becomes angry, but the only thing that she changes is how she refers to the Prophet. So, it's not that she starts cussing him out because she's angry. She only changes the way she says it. Says rather than by the Lord of Muhammad, she says by the Lord of Abraham. A very subtle change. Similarly, when the Prophet when Ibrahim, his son, was dying in his arms, he was overcome with grief. He started to cry. As we know, Arabian society at that time was a very masculine society. And so when the companions who were around him saw this, they were amazed, they were shocked to see what was happening. So they asked him, "Tears, Ya Rasulullah?" And I'm paraphrasing, by the way, just so we're clear. "Tears, Ya Rasulullah?" He said, the eyes shed tears and the heart break. We only say what pleases Allah. And sure, look at this. So the Prophet's own flesh and blood is dying in his arm. The way it's presented many times is that even in a situation like this, you should be this stoic stone statue of virtue, no visible signs of emotion or feeling at all on you, stoic and rock hard face, us as the British would say, stiff upper lip. But no, he's filled with emotion. He's grieving inside, and the grief is seen in his face. The tears come to his eyes. He's only saying what pleases Allah. So similar to Aisha, she's feeling something, but she only says things that are appropriate. He's heartbroken, shattered, tears flowing down his face. He only says what pleases Allah. So the emotion itself isn't an issue. It's what do you do with that emotion? And here, this example of knowing how when she was angry, even from that subtle change, this is that love map. This is that knowing the spouse so well that even subtle changes clue you into what's going on. And one of the things that we'll get into later, maybe a little bit more when we get to it, many times when you hear relationships, people will talk about relationships and will say that, they talk about conflict avoidance. You're trying to learn how you can avoid conflict. So here we have an example where Aisha had a particular habit when she was angry with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This is Aisha, Mu'mineen, mother of the believer, one of the greatest women in the history of Islam, one of the most knowledgeable women in the history of Islam. She's getting angry with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the most perfect human being to ever walk the face of the earth, and she's getting angry with him. Brothers, do you think you're anything like the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Do you think your character, your manners, your behavior comes even close to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? No, of course not. Sisters, does your knowledge rise to the level of Aisha's? Does your sacrifice, does your character rise to the level of Aisha, mother of the believers? course it does. So if this is true, but yet this is what we're seeing right now, but there is anger, there's conflict between them, and there's other stories that go into arguments and things like that. We know the situation with the honey and things like that that's recorded in the Quran about how things happened. There was disagreements, and he even abandoned them for 29 days. Arguments and disagreements happen even in the household of the Prophet, even with the mothers of the believers. If this is true for them, then in the greatest generation to ever walk the face of the earth, why do we think we're never going to see trouble or strife in our own relationship? It's not realistic. It's not about conflict avoid. Conflict is coming. It's about managing conflict. And the thing that you'll find, and the thing that's spoken about when it comes to the idea of this conflict, these arguments that come up, is that these arguments, if you truly understand what they represent, they're opportunities for us to realize what our spouse needs and be able to fill that need and to even improve the relationship. This is key. This is very important, but we spend more time with it. So he was highly attuned. The Prophet was highly attuned to when his wives were pleased or displeased, demonstrating his care and consideration at all times. And so he regularly visited and engaged in meaningful conversations with all of his wives. So went around and he spoke to all of them. He joked with them. He played with them. He asked about them, their day, things like that, etc. And fostering an environment of openness and trust. So this exemplifies his profound knowledge of his spouses and his ability to create a safe space for them to consult him freely. So moving on, we have communication as the foundation for building strong, loving relationships. Communication, I talked about the importance of speaking for yourself. Don't expect people to read your mind and know your heart. Yes, we want them to know us well. That's part of the point of love math, but don't take that as an excuse to just expect them to be able. One moment, please. Chef makes a joke with me about the number of events I have in my room. Um, so I had to shut off two of them so that it's not too distracting. So communication is the foundation. We want to make sure that it's there as a foundation for building a strong, loving relationship that we all want. So in Islam, there are important principles for how we communicate with kindness, listening attentively, and approaching conversations with good intentions, both from ourselves and of the other person. And more importantly, even practicing patience, the conversation, not being, impatient and rushing and everything else, etc. So some practical techniques for these conversations. One of them, and many of you have probably heard of this idea of using I statements, avoiding distraction, asking open-ended questions, validating feelings, even when disagreeing. And inshallah, we'll go into some of those details a little bit later. So these communication skills will help us develop a deep understanding and a connection with our loved ones. And this is what we want. This is the goal of communication, especially within our marriages, within our households. Communication between spouses, between parents and children shouldn't only be transactional. There should be a genuine care and concern. We know the ayah that talks about there being mawadda and rahma, and even that the purpose is taskunu ilayha. There is a sense of settled peace and tranquility with the spouse. This is important to not lose sight of, etc. So the key areas we'll explore today for building your love maps are your spouse's spiritual life, their dreams and goals, emotional world, family, and heritage. So this is an example of some of the areas that you can explore when you're having these conversations to build those love maps and rebuild those love maps. Well, understanding your spouse's religious journey for converts in particular, this idea of the religious journey is extra important. In converts, we might share some commonalities in the terms of our journeys, but our journeys are also always going to be unique and different. One of the things that the Gottmans alluded to, which I thought was really kind of insightful, was we talk about sometimes culture conflicts. You know, the husband and the wife come from different cultures, different backgrounds. Maybe one's a convert, one's, grew up in a Muslim society, a Muslim household, whatever, etc. They're from different cultures, uniquely different cultures, different even religious backgrounds, etc., etc., etc. Those are all challenges. Don't no bones about it. Those do present their own unique challenge. But one of the things they talk about, and we'll get into a lot more detail in future sessions, is each couple is its own unique culture, or should be, maybe a better way to put this, its own unique culture. So understanding each other's unique qualities, is important, because no matter the thing that they say is that even if you are from a similar background, grew up in similar families, living close to one another in the same communities, going to the same schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you still are going to have some culture conflict between the two of you when you marry, because you are not going to be carbon copies of one another. In spite of all of those commonalities that you share, you will still not be carbon copies. There will be differences. The way you observe a birthday, or the way you observe this thing, that thing, the other thing, holidays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these things can be different. In spite of all of those commonalities, they can still be different. So you need to figure out, the couple, what is the culture of that relationship? One of the things they talk about, and I'll just allude to it now, is this idea of ritual, shared ritual. So figure out for yourself as a couple how you're going to do these things, how you're going to observe things. That starts with this: getting to understand your spouse on a deeper level, understanding their journey. If they're a convert, what was their journey like? What were their challenges? What were their successes? What were the questions that set them on their journey? What were the answers, or how did they come to their answers, etc.? Such a struggle. Some of us, we've had enormous struggle. Some of us have, had it relatively easy, so to speak. Aspirations, all of these things will help you connect on a deeper level, especially from the standpoint of deepening that religious bond, that taqwa, within the couple itself, knowing that personal and professional aspiration. This is important too. We live in the dunya. We exist, except for a very few of us. We live, work, play, etc. in the dunya. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But understanding those things about personal and professional aspirations, short and long term, will allow you to support it and encourage them. So if they have a goal to do, whether it's start a business or go back to school or this thing, that thing, the other thing, and knowing that helps you kind of visualize and formulate your futures together, and how you work together as a team towards that goal. Understanding their fears and joys, stressors, and sources of comfort will help you empathize and provide the emotional support they need. This is one, and we'll get to this in another slide here. This is one where you have regular check-ins with each other, regular opportunities to just kind of take a pulse check, if you will, of where people are at, how they're doing, what they're worried about. We'll get into some examples of that very soon, inshallah. Appreciating their family background, cultural values, traditions will give you insight into who they are and where they come from. So whatever the background is, we know my dear brother Abu Sumaya, he has a particular cultural background. He was accustomed to certain things growing up, certain foods, certain things. Myself, I come from a very different background. In my case, I'm as white as they come. They don't get any whiter than me. And so I have a bunch of other different customs and foods and things like that I got used to. Oktoberfest was something that was big for me. When I was older, it was the Irish Fair. Was a big deal for me, etc. And understanding that about them, even on subtle levels, can tell you a little bit about them, and give you insight into them, maybe anticipate some reaction they might have to certain things, or some sensitivities they might have to certain things. I have some sensitivities, for instance, around people Jew bashing, not because I myself or my family is directly of Jewish descent, but my half sisters are both Jewish. And so, aside from the work I do in multi faith work, and the Jews I know that have been very very good people, very supportive people of things that are important to the Muslim community, etc. But my own half sisters are Jewish. My stepmother is Jewish. So, when I hear people attacking Jews blanketly, indirectly, they're attacking my family. And so I have some sensitivities around that. And so knowing these things is important. And then exploring these key areas will help strengthen that bond and the intimacy in your relationship. When you feel truly seen, and this is going to give you a sense of the nerdiness of my personality within Avatar, they have this phrase, of course, some of you are familiar with, and some of you are probably smiling to yourself right now, where it says that I see you. The idea being is not just that I see you with my eyes, but that I see you. I see all of you. I see into you. I see almost through you. I see all of you. And that's what it's saying, is that to truly have that ability to feel seen in your marriage, that's a powerful and a very, for lack of a better way of saying, it's a seductive quality in a relationship. Brothers, if you want to have that sort of fire with your spouse that you wish you would have, take the time to get to know them, really know them, and let them feel like you actually care, not just because you want to be with them intimately, but because you care about them as a person and who they are, and understanding them and being closer to them. It might not be as significant to you, but I promise you, our wives, that sort of intimacy in terms of the emotional bonds, that's a huge, huge factor for them to feel comfortable and to feel safe and to feel able to be what you would like them to be. Inshallah. So number 8, here's some more practical steps that we can talk about in terms of activities that we can do. And so these are things that you can either jot down. Inshallah, you'll have these available in one form or another. Inshallah, I'm hoping to have a workbook available for you by the end of the series here, where you'll be able to have something to work with and work on. So weekly check-ins, I alluded to this idea earlier. Weekly check-ins are a great way to stay connected and address any issues or concerns in the relationship. Don't wait until they become problems. Deal with them while they're small. They're easier to deal with. They're easier to address. Set aside 30 minutes each week for an uninterrupted conversation. Keyword there, uninterrupted. Ideally, put your phones away. Don't try talking to people. Don't try doing anything else. Checking your email, watching TV, whatever it is, etc. Go, if you have to, go somewhere. Physically go somewhere where everything else is away and you have no possibility of being distracted, and just take that time. 30 minutes isn't long. 30 minutes is not long. Do that each week for an uninterrupted conversation about your feelings, challenges, and wins. Real chance to take a good temperature check on the relationship and on your spouse to see how they're doing. Maybe you think they're doing fine and you find out they're struggling. They're really struggling. And maybe all they need is a hug, or they just really would love it if you could, maybe take care of dinner or whatever, whatever it is, whatever it is. This allows you to openly discuss what's going on well and what needs more attention. So the wins and the fails. Question games that are a fun way to learn new things about your partner and deepen your understanding of each other. Even the Gottman, or actually not the Gottman, but the 5 love languages. Some of you are familiar with this one as well. I trained in some of their material as well. They have an app, if I remember correctly, that has a bunch of different questions for different purposes that you can use as conversation starters. If you can't think of any, you can grab one of something like that. There's others available as well that just uses ways to get the conversation going. And some of them can be fun, silly, some of them can be very serious, but a way to get the conversation going, because some people have a hard time getting started. So a way to get that going. And if you feel reluctance, this is the way to, this is the best place to grow in, that is with your spouse, finding that safety and that security where you can start to open up, if nowhere else, with them, inshallah, after Allah, of course. Taking turns. This is the key. Taking turns asking open-ended questions about preferences, memories, and dreams. Now, hopefully everybody knows when we say open-ended questions what we're talking about. We say an open-ended question, we mean a question that is not simply a yes or no answer. It requires a sentence. It requires an explanation. It requires actual sharing. So you take turns with that, etc. And the key here, most of us, we should already be familiar with this, inshallah. But when you're asking these questions, or when you're hearing their responses from the other party, don't try to think of your response while you're listening to them. Actually hear what they have to say. And a method that they get into much later on in the training, and we may touch on in future sessions, is where the first person, they share everything that's important about a particular issue or concern that they have, everything, and they keep going, keep going, keep going until they've said everything they need to say. The other person is listening. They're not trying to speak. They're not trying to interrupt. The only thing they ever do is, if they say anything, is they're checking to make sure they understand what the other person is saying. When they're all done, they repeat back what they heard, not verbatim, but what they heard, what they understood from what that person said, and that keeps happening until the speaking person is satisfied that the person listening understood them to their satisfaction. They heard them. They actually heard them to their satisfaction. Then roles reverse. And the person that was listening, now they get to talk. The other person has to listen and do the same thing. Listen, make sure they understand, repeat it back until the other person was satisfied they were fully heard. Then and only then you get a chance to talk about your problems. Because by that time, you both are seeing things from the other person's perspective. You still might disagree. That's fine. But when you see things from the other person's perspective, finding a solution becomes a lot easier. A lot easier. So this can encourage meaningful dialogue and helps you discover new sides to your partner. Joint journaling. This is one I would encourage you to do. This can be really interesting. Joint journaling is a wonderful bonding activity where you write together about your fondness, goals, and aspirations. You can find suggestions for conversation started with journaling prompts, or you can suggest one of your own, each of you coming up with one and jotting down your ideas and sharing them. You'll be surprised sometimes what comes out of those. Some some major revelations can sometimes come out of those. And then sharing your journal entries allows you to be vulnerable, celebrate your relationship, really getting to know one another. So some sample questions here, for creating love maps, and a tool for you to deepen the relationship, to understand and connect with them. Organize the 4 K: spiritual connection, daily life, dreams and aspirations, values and beliefs. Spiritual connection, you can explore different aspects of faith, religious practice, once understanding of Islam has evolved over time. So obviously, for most of us, faith is going to be, at least at its most basic level, the same. Muslim. Religious practice, some of us might have a particular school that we follow, Hanbali, Shafi, etc., Hanafi, Maliki, or something else. Some of us might not. And the understanding of Islam and how it's evolved. For us as converts, many times, our understanding is on a spectrum of evolution. It starts off a particular and it grows. Usame and I were having a conversation about this just, it was either earlier today or the other day, about the trajectory we've traveled in terms of our understanding and our application and things, of the things we've learned and things we know. So understanding those things, just because maybe you are both Muslim, you can have very different approaches to your faith. In and of itself, that isn't necessarily a problem. It's important that you understand that, so that you don't wind up with these unexpected controversies and conflicts around those things, because you've had those conversations in in daily life section. So this is one we talk about all of the challenges of the day, gestures uh, that make one feel appreciated, and routines that are stressful or enjoyable. So just understanding how their day, one of the questions I know that comes in some of the premarital questionnaires is, what does a perfect day look like for you? You know, and that's a hard one sometimes for people to answer. They've never even thought of the idea of a perfect day. But it's interesting if you can get someone to take the time and think about it. And I just want to make a quick side comment: when you're asking questions like this, whether it's premarital questionnaires or you're having these conversations to create or update your love maps with one another, don't just try and give short answers. Try and be as open and as vulnerable and as honest as you possibly can with your answers. Don't, as my wife tried to do when we were getting to know each other before we got married, um, we would ask questions. She would be reluctant to answer, so I'd go ahead and answer. She goes the same or ditto, and I'm like, no, no, you don't get to do that. Like, you got to give it to me in your own words. It's like you need to hear from one another. Even if it is the same, for argument's sake, we'll say it may be the same. Still needs to hear it in your own words. Still need to hear it in your own. You reflect it back in your own words. The way you express it might say something unique about you. Next one here, the dreams and aspirations section. Delves into accomplishments that would bring pride, visions for the family's future, hidden talents to develop. So this is important. And this gets important when we talk about conflict management. Because one of the concepts that is spoken about is how many conflicts in relationships, they start because of misunderstandings, disagreements about dreams and aspiration, or fears sometimes. And so sometimes that's what might seem like an incredibly simple issue that becomes an argument is because there was a much bigger issue at stake underneath it all for someone. One of the examples they gave was an argument between a couple about a dog. And the reason the person that was anti-dog was so anti-dog, it turned out, and they did not know this in this particular scenario, was that person had had a horrible experience with a dog attacking them. So they were not just terrified, but they were absolutely adamant about never having a dog. The other person had a polar opposite experience with dogs. They had dogs growing up. The dog was their best friend. It's that, the other thing, etc. Granted, dogs as an example is not a likely example for a Muslim couple, although it can happen. But I think you get the idea. People can have what seems like it's just a dog, and there's these big arguments, emotions, crying, etc., etc., etc. And it's like, what's going on? And then suddenly, if you can get away from all of that and start to have these conversations, you start to realize there's something much more, for lack of a better way of saying it, visceral at the bottom of it all. And suddenly, again, you may still disagree, but now you understand it with a very different new light. And it makes the conversation a little bit easier to have, a little bit easier to try and find solutions for. And finally, the values and beliefs section covers important values about raising kids, family tradition. It goes back to the rituals of connection, meaningful acts of charity and things like that, etc. How do you want, what values and beliefs do you have? Again, just because you're both Muslim doesn't necessarily mean that your values and beliefs are identical. And so I think we take that for granted. They may not be identical. It's important to understand those things. And if there are some differences, how do you navigate those differences? Maybe your families growing up, you had different traditions, especially if you're coming from a convert background. Our families growing up had very different traditions in some cases, whether it's Christmas or, whatever, Passover, et cetera, Diwali, if you're coming from a Hindu background, et cetera. All these different traditions. How do you navigate those things? What do you do? What do you do with family? All of these different things? These are all conversations that can create a lot of stress. Marriages, some cultures, the cultures, the traditions around marriages, these things can be very difficult to navigate as well. So all of these questions can serve as starting points for couples to have meaningful conversations and gain deeper insights into each other's lives, beliefs, and aspirations. This is the key. This is what's important for us, is to have that ability to truly know one another. And so this is the last slide here, inshallah. So the Islamic ideal of marriage is one of mutual care, protection, and intimacy. One that I think we all know, like garments for one another. Spoke about it in the beginning. You also find the reference that is most often quoted regarding marriage, in particular, is from Surah Al-Rum, 21, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, من آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا تسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. Allah is saying here what means, and of his signs, Allah's signs, that he created for you from yourself, mates, that you may find tranquility, sakina, in them and with them, and placed between you, created between you. The word is really created, not just placed, created between you, affection and mercy. And there was an interesting point I had heard from one of my sheikhs a number of years ago. The order here, mawadda wa rahma, that the rahma, the mercy, requires the affection to come first. Because it needs to be affection, and it needs to be and attraction. I don't know why my video stopped all of a sudden. I'm assuming somebody did that deliberately. I hope. But the mawadda, the affection has to be there first in order for true mercy to develop. Without that mawadda, sorry here, hang on. Start video. Yeah, I didn't stop it. I don't know why it stopped. All right. We still have the slides up, I hope. Yes.
Yeah, it's still up.
Okay. I don't know what happened with the video. So that the mawadda, the affection precedes the mercy. You want to have that love and that affection. Interestingly enough, I didn't prepare it for today because it's just coming to my mind as I'm saying this. And Abu Sumaya, you may have come across this one time. I was reading in Ibn al-Jawzi's book, al-Khawatir, his short speeches, or short reflections. And one of those is talking about marriage. In there, he makes what I think is actually a pretty decent case for the importance of love in the process of deciding to get married. And I know one of the classic arguments we hear in the community is that there's no such thing as a love marriage. This is un-Islamic, you'll hear some people say. Un-Islamic, love marriage. What is this thing? This is a Western thing, Afro thing. Yeah, whatever. Ibn al-Jawzi, rahmatullahi alayhi, he makes a very interesting, I think a very strong case for the need, even the necessity for love and attraction in marriage before getting married. He talks about getting, you're encouraged to see the spouse before you get married, to establish that there's an attraction there, etc. And he talks about seeing them to the point of where you stop seeing them, and then you know that there's love, that there's the right type of attraction when you can't stop thinking about them. And, it almost sounds like obsession almost, but it's this interesting balance. And I'll dig up the reference, inshallah, for next week. But so he makes a strong case for the idea that there should be love. If that feeling isn't there, then you should probably move on to the next one, because there's that mawadda not being there means that the relationship itself could have challenges, because there's not that affection and that attraction to create those bonds that bring about the mercy. Allahu Akbar. So the mawadda and the rahmah, affection and mercy, and that indeed in that are signs, ayat, for people who give thought and think. It's not just something that's taken at face value, but it's for those people who are paying attention and thinking about what's going on. So regular, intentional communication with kindness is essential to build and maintain deep knowledge of your spouse. Dedicating time each week to deepen your understanding of your spouse's changing world is a consistent practice that strengthens your love maps and the intricate, harmonious Islamic mosaic pattern. No, never mind. That's something about the designs. So my wife would be very upset with me if I didn't include this last thing. I had her. She's my editor, if you will. She actually dressed me, not physically dressed me, but she picked the shirt. Make sure that I wasn't cite to scare people away. She wanted to make sure that I shared this one reminder when she was reading through it. She was like, I love this particular story. I knew the story she was talking about. I love the story too. This goes to this idea of love maps and knowing our spouses. And this levity, this mawadda and rahmah that we were just talking about. So Aisha radiallahu anha, the Prophet ﷺ would use code with each other to demonstrate their love. Aisha radiallahu anha, one time asked the Prophet ﷺ how he would describe his love for her. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said that it's like a strong and binding knot. The more you tug, the stronger it gets, in other words. So it's a very tight knot. So every so often, Aisha would playfully ask him, how's the knot? So he would say to her sometimes, saying, as strong as the first day you asked. So they had this little code phrase, something that most people wouldn't think of it. How's the knot? You'd be like, what are they talking about? How's the knot? It's strong. It's like it wouldn't make much sense to many people, but for them, it was very significant. It was very intimate, very, very, one of those things that brings a smile to your face, warmth to your heart. They had this. They had this playfulness. And strong is when you first asked. So it's like the fire's still there. The honeymoon phase is still going. So I don't know. This was the way. And this whole exchange goes to the issue of how people say, how the prophet treated Aisha and everything else, etc., and the lies that come with that. This is not the behavior of someone that's like this. This is not that kind of behavior. It stopped.